This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley.
Good evening, this is Carol Murphy, and you're listening to Heartstock Radio. Thank you so much for joining us and listening this evening. It's kind of a windy, coolish day here, but nonetheless, a beautiful day. In just a moment, we're going to be back with Gregg Treinish of Adventure Scientists. He's going to tell you what he's up to. Thanks for listening. This is Heartstock Radio. I'm Carol Murphy.
Sun come shining, and I was strolling in the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling. The voice was chanting as the fog was lifting.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Carol Murphy. This is Heartstock Radio. Remember that you can email us at heartstockradio@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. Drop us a line. Love to hear from you. Always looking for guests doing amazing things in business. Speaking of which, our guest this evening is Gregg Treinish. Hi, Gregg.
Hey, how are you?
Thanks for being here. I'm doing great. And you're the founder of Adventure Scientists. Please tell our listeners, what is Adventure Scientists?
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. We are a nonprofit organization based in Bozeman, Montana, that mobilizes the outdoor community, and that's hikers, bikers, skiers, climbers, boaters, to collect scientific data while they are out exploring. And so we give them the tools they need to successfully engage in really targeted conservation efforts, and we deploy them all across the world.
Tell us a little bit about how you got started with Adventure Scientists. What was your inspiration to start this organization? It sounds very cool.
Yeah, thanks so much. I was originally an explorer. I spent my early 20s and into my late 20s as somebody who was trekking around the world, literally walked the length of continents. I was the first, along with a friend, to trek through South America, the length of South America. I hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2004, and that was really one of the first places where I had a very deep-seated selfish feeling for being out there, out on these expeditions, without there being any clear benefit to the world for my being out on these long expeditions. And so I had this one moment in particular where I had been wrestling with that feeling of what is it all for and why am I doing this? And I had fallen in the rain and tripped on these rocks and picked up one of these rocks and chucked it at a tree. And in frustration, I just fell down to the ground sobbing. And I vowed to myself in that moment that I would make a difference while doing what I love to do. So for years, I searched for what that difference would be, and it wasn't until I found the sciences after the South America trek that it really dawned on me that I was having the impact I wanted to have. I was benefiting the species that I was working with. I was tracking lynx and wolverines and grizzly bears up in Montana. I'd worked in California with owls. I had worked on the Missouri River with sturgeon, endangered fish species. And I was really benefiting these species, but I was only one person, and I was only doing it as part of field crews. And I realized that if I could train others to collect the data in the same way I was, that my impact would be far greater. And so I started the organization kind of betting that if we could arm people with tools to make a difference, that they would choose to spend their time for benefit. And we've been proven right tens of thousands of times since.
So tell us a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit about your background that may have influenced the path that your life took.
Yeah, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in the suburbs of Cleveland, and my family we were not outdoors people. I think I went camping once when I was like 3 years old with my family, and that was about it. We did take some trips out west from there and came and visited the Rocky Mountains, and I had some opportunities to travel when I was young as well to South Africa when I was 16 as part of a student ambassador program where we were doing some service work there. And that really did open my eyes and expose me to how other people in the world live. And I'm really thankful for those opportunities. My love of the outdoors didn't really start until I was 16 or so. I'd actually gotten kicked out of high school and was on my first backpacking trip right around the same time. I actually don't remember which came first, but I just felt so empowered by being outside and there was this kid that was struggling, and I was able to take some of the weight out of his pack, and that changed that moment where like I carried this kid's apples. I was like helpful and powerful and just felt so good in that moment. And it's something that's always stuck with me as one of the powerful experiences that I've had early on in the outdoors.
So once you came up with the idea and the realization that you could be, exponentially more impactful by engaging others in the same activities that you were doing, where did you go from there? How did you actually find the people that were helping you gather data?
That realization happened in November of 2010 over some Chinese food at a lunch I was having with the woman that I walked South America with. I've always kind of been the person when I commit to something, it's just might as well be done. I knew I was going to do it in that moment. I had the idea. By that afternoon, I had kind of thought through a little bit more around what the business model might be. It's certainly changed a lot since then. But then by January, the company I was working for, it was a wilderness therapy program where we were taking at-risk youth out into the mountains. We had gotten word, I think it was very early January, that they were shutting down because of going out of business. And by mid-January, I had incorporated in Montana as a nonprofit. And I started by Googling, how do you start a nonprofit? And it was myself on my couch. I bought a website with there was a man named Tad Sweet, and Tad had a house here in Bozeman, and he wrote me a $250 check to get started. And with that, I bought a website. I think I maybe got a new version of Microsoft Word, but that was about it. And I did have really good connections at that point. I had been named a National Geographic Adventurer of the Year and was able to lean on the relationships I had built as an explorer to get the right people to guide me early on. And that included people like Conrad Anker, who is one of the world's greatest mountaineers. He was recently in the film Maru. It was people like Céline Cousteau, Jacques Cousteau's granddaughter. And then here locally, a guy named Jeff Pampush, who's the director of development for the Peregrine Fund, and Lance Craighead, who had started the Craighead Institute here in Bozeman, were people that very early on were generous with their time and would kind of mentor me and help me figure out how to get this thing started.
So the next step, I would imagine, is once you had all the infrastructure built for your business, was connecting with potential scientists or adventurers or both. How did you find those individuals, or did they find you?
Yeah, it was a lot of just grit and determination at the beginning. The way it worked back then is that my friends, people I would meet or know through the outdoor industry, would call me up and say, hey, I've heard about what you're doing. I'm going to Antarctica. I'm going to Mount Everest. I'm going to anywhere. And I would love to collect some data. Tell me what to do. And so I would take their expedition and I would scour the scientific literature and I would look for who is working, for example, on Mount Everest. I looked at who's studying plant life in extreme environments. I'm sure that I had looked for wildlife and other things as well. But when I finally found somebody whose work seemed really interesting to me, who had a conservation slant to it, I would reach out and I'd say, hey, I've got 2 explorers that are going to Mount Everest. What could they do for you to benefit your work? And 9 times out of 10, the people I called would say, that's really cool. Let me think about that. Or some of them would say, I've heard there's plants up there. I would love a collection of the plants. And we talk about protocols and permits, and we would talk about everything that needed to happen. And I would facilitate that process and help train the volunteer. And then they would go, and we had some really early wins with that, where we collected the highest known plant life on Earth from Mount Everest, from 2 climbers that were up there. And we pretty quickly got some really good press. We started tracking wolverines here in Montana, and the New York Times came out and thought that was pretty cool and put us on their homepage. Yeah, we got the outdoor community's leaders, some of the best snowboarders in the world, the best climbers, skiers, to make films about what they were doing with us. And that really bolstered our credibility and our standing in at least through press, and that's kind of how we got started.
And how's the system working now? I imagine it's kind of evolved over time.
Oh yeah, it certainly has. So one of the things we learned is that model where it was people just saying, "Hey, I'm going to this place. Can I collect data for you?" It did 2 things. One is it spread us really thin, because instead of working on a few projects, we were working on, at one point, over 40 different scientific projects. And so training people at that is very difficult to do. Secondly, the impact that you can have when one person goes to Mount Everest versus organizing a study where you're collecting data systematically above 20,000 feet all around the world is very different. And so the impact we were having was very low. One day about 4 years ago, I realized that we were doing a lot of work and not really having that big of a benefit on conservation. And so we quit everything we were doing and started fresh with these 3 criteria that really guide our process today. And those are that there is, number 1, a very clear environmental or human health issue that has been data limited, that there's a clear and tangible pathway from data collection to an outcome. Something actually has to be different as a result of the data collection. And number 3, that there is a clear need for the outdoor community. And so that was really about why us? Why are we the right ones for this job? And it's that outdoor skill set, certainly, but the fact that there are creative problem solvers throughout the outdoor community, that there are people who will find out a way to get it done. So if your goal is to collect that plant life, you'll figure it out. And that you pay attention to detail, that you have this mindset of making sure you bring the right equipment and double back your strap or things don't go well. So those realizations, if you will, allowed us to take a really firm look at what we were doing. I think we cut from those 40 projects down to about 3. And since that time, we've been really, really targeted with which project investments we make. Now, there's been big consequences for that. We don't have the breadth of data collection opportunities that we would like for the volunteers. But it was a question of really asking ourselves, what is our mission and what is our focus? And that very clearly is on solving some of the world's biggest challenges or enabling those solutions to take place and move forward more quickly. And so when we look at it through the lens of why we're doing what we're doing, it's unfortunate that we can't say right now, anywhere you go, anywhere on Earth, there's a scientist who needs data, and we are going to work to get back there. But what's more important is what we can say is anywhere you go and work with us, we can be really certain that the data you collect matters.
So if I'm adventuring into the rainforest of Borneo, Kalimantan, I can call you and say, hey, do you need any data collected?
Yeah, and again, it's a matter of making sure that the projects we have are really well vetted and really well developed. So it's not those one-off relationships anymore where you can call us and just say that. It's much more, we will say, hey, we've got an incredible project opportunity across the tropics. Who's going to the tropics? So we've kind of switched it from what you're suggesting, where if you're going there, you call us, to us saying we have a need in these locations. And, you know, we're working on projects that are very much across the Amazon, very much across Indonesia and Polynesia, and we will be launching those projects in the next coming months to years.
Well, I'd really like to talk some more about that because I have a feeling some of it may relate to climate change. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
A lot of our work is tied to climate change.
Fantastic. We're going to take a really quick music break, and we'll be back in just a moment with Gregg. He'll tell us more about Adventure Scientists. This is Carol Murphy. Thanks for listening to Hearts Talk.
Her voice was chanting as the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on the sign it said, no trespassing. But on the other side, it didn't say nothing. That sign was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California.
This is Hearts Talk Radio, and I'm Carol Murphy. Thank you so much for listening. Our guest today is Gregg Treinish of Adventure Scientists. Hi again, Gregg.
Hey, how are you?
We were just talking about how your company has kind of evolved over time, and your current model sounds like it's a lot more targeted. What are some of the projects that you're working on? And let's talk about some of the projects you've worked on in the past that have been successes also. I think that would be cool.
Totally. So ones that we're working on at the moment, one that I'm really excited about is we're creating genetic reference libraries for timber. So what that means is that it will one day become possible to look at an incoming timber shipment to port, potentially to a hardware store. And we're working on the libraries of data that will make it possible to instantly know what species of wood you're looking at, where it came from, and whether it was legally or illegally harvested. And so we've just completed our data collection on big leaf maple, which is a tree species that goes from San Diego to Vancouver that is targeted by poachers largely because of its flaming or its patterns in the wood that are used in the guitar industry. $40,000 guitars are made of big leaf maple. And so this is a wood that gets poached all the time. Another that we're really excited about is we are going to begin surveying for orphaned and idled oil and gas wells. So these are oil and gas wells that have been abandoned as far back as the 1870s all the way up to the 1950s that are having, there's various hazards. So people are falling into these or can fall into these. There are risks to the environment as far as gases or crude oil leaking out of these, and there are an unknown number of them across, especially in the eastern part of the country, an unknown number of these that are leaking unknown quantities of hazardous material into the environment. And so we're going to go find those, mobilize volunteers to use different technology, things as diverse as ground penetrating radar and drones with magnetic sensors attached to them, to go look for these orphaned and idled wells across 2 national forests in Ohio and Kentucky. So those are 2 that we're currently working on that I'm super excited about. I guess I'll pause there for a moment if there's any questions.
Yeah, and climate change, we mentioned that a little bit earlier. Anything related to climate change?
Totally. So both of those projects I just mentioned are really closely tied to climate change. And so one of the leading causes of climate change is deforestation. Estimates are up to 30% that of climate change that is attributable to the loss of our forests. And the number one cause of the loss of our forests is illegal timber harvests. This is an issue that is on scale with the global heroin trade as far as economic loss and the criminal networks that are established to transport and harvest illegal timber around the globe. And it's having a major impact on climate change. And as I'm sure many of your listeners know, the trees are able to filter carbon out of the atmosphere, and it's probably the most effective way to keep greenhouse gases low. And when you destroy forests, you eliminate the ability for the planet to regulate itself in that way. That project is really closely tied. And then methane, compared to carbon dioxide, is 84 times more potent of a greenhouse gas. And so methane would be the gas that is leaking into the atmosphere from some of these orphaned and idled wells, which is only part of the problem associated with them, but that's certainly got ties to climate change as well.
And how do you fund your company? You mentioned that somebody wrote you a couple $100 check in the beginning, and how's it gone since then? How were you able to keep up and operational and flourish as you are now?
Yeah, so we are a not-for-profit organization who has a fee-for-service revenue model in addition to a philanthropic revenue model. So we have a split model where we are contracted or paid by entities like Harvard Medical School, the U.S. Forest Service, the World Resources Institute, which is another large NGO. Well, they're a large NGO. We're certainly not. So we'll have fee-for-service work where we're actually charged with collecting the data and are responsible or contractually obligated to go get these data. Many of those clients, if you will, hire us because of the public engagement aspects of what we do. We're a cost-effective way to get data over a scale that really isn't possible to get any other way. That distinctiveness really sets us aside and makes folks want to work with us. And then we couldn't do what we do without the philanthropic support that we're fortunate enough to have. And there's private individuals that fund us largely. We have a few foundations, but not many, because we're not a typical model. So we found that it's actually tough for some foundations to fund us because we just don't have the typical conservation metric buckets that we really fit into. But those private philanthropists have just been essential and have allowed us to make sure that the contracts we're taking on strictly because of mission alignment and because we believe those projects could really change the world.
Well, that creates a lot of freedom, it sounds like. And I know that you really focus on trying to create an exceptional work environment. What kind of things have you done in this realm? And I wanted to talk a little bit about Zappos. Maybe you've heard about what they do to create positive work environments also.
Yeah. Well, I'd be really curious to hear more about the specific things you're referring to at Zappos. I read a lot and read what's best practices, certainly, but what's happening across different management areas and how people are empowering employees. But I'd love to hear about Zappos.
Yeah, they have a whole culture camp that you can go to, and they basically teach you how to create happiness for your workers. That was kind of one of their fundamental springboards, is that they felt like they couldn't have happy customers if their employees weren't happy. So all of this kind of ties into the whole positive work environment, creating teams, and that's not easy. That's not easy to do. How do you do it at Adventure Scientists?
Yeah, it's a constant challenge. And I'll say that me jumping into this, literally Googling how to start a nonprofit, my lack of experience as a manager was pretty apparent. I had actually worked as a manager, but when you're running an organization, it's a very different feeling than being just a manager of, a mid-level manager. Mm-hmm. And so I've had a huge learning curve, and I'm still really trying to learn how to make this a great place to work for our employees. I know that it involves a lot of listening and a lot of asking questions about how we can make this a better place to work. And a lot of it is just about the attitude and the mindset or the culture that I bring to the organization. And I think this is a fun place to work because we take this mindset that I first really had in the adventure world, where, there's no obstacle too big to get around. It's with creativity, persistence, and optimism that you can navigate around any obstacle. And I think that's really fun for people to think in that way, that optimistic mindset. We live by our values, which are COPARs. So that's creativity, optimism, persistence, achievement. We pause to reflect. So reflection and stewardship, where we take care of one another like we want to take care of the world. And so we live by those. We repeat those organizational values on a weekly basis in our stand-up meetings. People are constantly looking for and celebrating examples of how they have enacted one of those values. And I think it really does all come back to that, into that mindset.
Can you say that acronym again? What was that?
Yeah, it's COPARs. So it's creativity, optimism, persistence, achievement, reflection, and stewardship. We'll gather, and anytime we really have a team meeting, we break the meeting with all hands in the middle and COPARs, and then we go back to our work. We have really cool programs. Like, I think we're pretty generous with our time off. A first-year worker at any level here is going to start with 5 weeks off in their first year. And that includes Greg, Thanksgiving and Christmas.
We're kind of coming to the end, unfortunately. The time goes so quickly. We've got about a minute left. How might folks reach you if they have more questions for you?
Yeah, and I hope they do. We're at adventurescientists.org, and you can reach us there or write info@adventurescientists.org, and we'd love to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Greg. This has been Heartstock Radio, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Carol Murphy. Bye-bye.
On the sign it said, no trespass.
Heartstock Radio is a production of KBMF 102.5 Butte America Radio. Hear our live programs every Friday at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time via livestream at butteamericaradio.org.